So this
Hi,
is my
Matt.
first of 3 slides, which is just the title. And hey, I'm Matt Martz. The second slide is an intro on me. So there's 2 out of 3 slides done. I'm Matt Martz. I'm an AWS community builder for those that don't know, or for those that are watching this recorded. I've been in the program since the beginning, pretty much. Uh, I'm a principal software architect at Definitive, where we make an iOS app that helps people save money by activating their card-linked credit card offers to them. So go check that out. And I've created some courses for Free Code Camp. I did the CDK crash course, which is one of Alan's all-time favorite Free Code Camp courses. And then I worked with Matt Morgan, another community builder, to make an event-driven architecture deep dive. And I write a bunch of blog posts and stuff. And we're going to be using CDK because I'm a CDK fanboy. I know everyone is. So if you're not familiar with CDK, it's the cloud development kit. You can basically write code to generate CloudFormation YAML files, and it's available in a bunch of languages. Yeah, I'm gonna speed run this. I can already tell because we're already 4 minutes in, if that, and I'm done with my slides. So what are we going to talk about here? We're talking about all of the native service events that AWS puts out in the accounts, and it's not something that you typically think of AWS accounts doing. A lot of people don't know about these. And the way I usually get to this is I'll just Google AWS service events, and then you can see the list of services that have all of these events, and the availability of those events, whether they're best effort or durable. So I use AWS CloudFormation service events a lot. This would apply to just vanilla CloudFormation, CDK, or SAM. Anything that's deploying anything through CloudFormation, it's a really useful one to have. Another big ticket one is S3. If you have EventBridge events turned on for S3, it emits all the events when the objects are created and stuff like that. What's a little frustrating about these native service events, and I've been talking to some people at AWS about this, but one of the really frustrating things is, this is my work account, but that's fine. If you go to the schema registry in EventBridge, so going to the EventBridge console and then down to schema registry, and look at the AWS event schema registry, it doesn't have everything here. It only has 9 pages worth of stuff, and there's more than that. Even if I search for AWS CloudFormation, it doesn't have the cloud. It has one of the 6 or 7 CloudFormation events. So you've got a couple options though. You can go to, refresh that. On this page, a lot of these, especially the CloudFormation link here on the AWS services that generates events page, you click that. It goes through kind of what the specs are for those. So the big one is the stack status change, but you can also get down to the resource level, or if you have stack sets that you need to pay attention to, or things like that. And this is the one I end up triggering a lot of things off of for things like destruction as a service, when you have ephemeral CloudFormation stacks or self-deleting CloudFormation stacks. I'll tie into this event to help trigger those things and update the schedules so that the stacks can basically delete themselves. Pause for questions. I know I'm going super quick.
For those of us with older eyes, maybe you could zoom the font a little or something.
Yeah, good.
I'm just gonna get you some bifocals, Daryl. That's all.
I have bifocals, but I still can't see it. So.
I know I can't look. I'm looking up through mine.
So
thank you.
There's that. I've written a bunch of blog posts on things like ephemeral stacks. They're on my blog at matt.martz.codes. So this is one that I've given a talk on a few times, but basically it's just tying into that. And anytime a stack update happens, it updates an EventBridge scheduled rule for some period of time that's in a stack tag, and then it will, once the event fires off to trigger it, some Lambda will go and delete the stack for you, and then everything is cleaned up. So that's one example. Another thing I've used this for is event-driven documentation. So you can tie into the CloudFormation status changes and then trigger a Lambda or a step function off of that and have that compute, like look at what was inside of this stacks change set. And if it sees anything for like API gateway or Lambdas attached to API gateway endpoints or event bridge schema type stuff, like if there was a new event bridge rule or event pattern or some change associated with that, you can basically create your own automated documentation engine and then use something like David Boyne's event catalog to kind of put in an internal portal of these changes across different AWS accounts. So I've used that at various former job sites and stuff. It can be super useful, especially if you have a large organization and a lot of developers. So definitely worth checking that kind of stuff out. So let's write some code. So I've already created a folder, but I will initialize a CDK project. I'll bump up the size of that. Doesn't seem like it did that much. So I'll do npx CDK at latest init language equals TypeScript.
Hey, Matt, can I ask a question while you're doing this?
Sure.
The events that we're talking about that all the services publish, they're going specifically to EventBridge, right? Like all the events are being published in EventBridge.
Yes, they're all going to the default bus in EventBridge, and there's a lot of them. They run the gamut, but they all go to the default bus. You're not paying for them. They're just like natural parts of the AWS ecosystem, and you can't turn them off. Like,
do you know, you might not know the answer to this question. Do you know if those events are tied to the limits on the default event bus? You can only have a certain amount of throughput on that bus.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I mean, you can't turn them off, so I would hope not, but they're not. They shouldn't impact, like it'd be pretty shitty design if it impacted your actual events you care about. But I think with the prefix that, because they're all prefixed with AWS dot and then the service name. I think they probably exclude them, but I don't know a firm answer on that.
Okay, I'll see if I can get an answer before your talk's done.
Sweet. Okay, so I initialized the project. I'll open it up, bump up the font size. And we're just going to do some basic stuff to see what we're working with. One little known thing that people might not be aware about for maybe CDK or even just for like, I don't know, CloudFormation or SAM. I have no idea how you would do this in SAM, but this is how I would do it in CDK. First, we're going to create a construct, and in CDK, a construct is like a prepackaged thing that you can make that bundles a bunch of functionality together. So I'm going to create a log group and then an event bridge rule to pipe stuff to that log group. Instead of rewriting this code over and over or copy pasting the YAML or whatever, it's just going to be a TypeScript function. So I'm going to create a, what did I call this? I'm just going to call it event log because that's what I did before. And I'm going to export the class, call it event log, and it extends construct. So this is going to get imported from a library that is basically a CDK library for creating these constructs. So constructs translate to CloudFormation YAML basically directly. This would be considered a level 3 construct. A level 1 construct in CDK would be like one-to-one with the CloudFormation API spec. A level 2 construct would add maybe some sensible defaults to that and some helper methods. And then a level 3 construct is like a grouping of multiple level 2 or level 1 constructs. So this is how that generally looks. So I'm going to first create the log group. Call it an observer. Give it a name, which I will populate later. And we're going to set the retention, and kind of more importantly is the removal policy. Well, this is the removal policy, but where the removal policy, setting it to destroy, means when I destroy this CDK stack that I eventually end up deploying, it will also remove the log group. So it's cleaning up itself when you destroy the stack. The default policy is to retain. So if you don't set the removal policy, the log group would persist even if you didn't have it around. So there's that. And then retention. Retention is important to set. Oh my gosh. And we'll just, I don't know, we'll do it for a day. Doesn't really matter. By default, it's infinite, which isn't super useful. I'm going to expand this a little bit. I'm going to define an interface. Interface. So that I can customize the log group name, for example. And then when I create this construct, I can pass that in. So I can makes it easier to reuse this. If I didn't do this step and I kept trying to create the same log group name, CloudFormation is going to blow up, and we don't want that. So that's easy enough there. So now we'll create the rule. Excuse me. Allergies have been very bad. And this is going to use an event pattern. Here's an example event pattern that Copilot wants me to use, which I don't care about, but we'll just go with that for now. And I'm actually going to pass this in as an input too.
I actually use that exact event pattern all the time when I'm debugging my ECS stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, well, maybe Copilot is sourcing it off of you, so thanks. All right, so what did this do? It imported a bunch of stuff from AWS CDK lib, including like the event pattern interface and the rule and CloudWatch log group and all that kind of stuff. So what does this do? So we created the log group, and then we create a rule, an event bridge rule, that is going to use whatever pattern we give it, and we'll define that in a second. And it's basically just piping all of these event bridge events from event bridge and into a log group. So it's going to basically create a log entry for every single event that's flowing through it. So that's a generic. This is just a basic construct. It's reusable. We've defined everything. So now I can go back to the EDA stack itself and then do new event log. Pass it in the stack along with the event log name, and we need to define the two properties. So log group name. Naming things is hard. We'll do that. I don't think that'll blow up. And then the event pattern I want is we'll give it a source of. So there's a handy library. Or there's a handy helper function from CDK called match, and it includes a couple of things for matching different event patterns in CDK. So I can do match.prefix AWS stat, because all of the events are prefixed with that. I can also do things like exclude a certain detail type that I know is noisy and I don't care about. So I can do anything but, and then AWS API call. Actually, I'm just going to copy this. There. So now if I create a terminal, SSO, and I will use, let's see, I'll use my Works dev account. Why not? What could go wrong there? Make sure I'm logged in.
While you logged in,
Yeah.
I got the answer. These
Sweet.
service events do not count toward the throughput limits on the default event bus.
Perfect.
They're transparent.
That's what I thought. Okay. Okay, so now we're actually going to deploy it. This is asking, if I want to make the policy changes and stuff to the IAM rules and stuff to allow the different piping and all that kind of stuff. And I do. So while that deploys, I already have a version of this deployed in the same account, which I don't think they should interfere with each other, but it's been running for the last, I don't know, day or two. And we can see kind of what the events look like flowing through this same type of log stream. So now I'm in logs insights, and I named the log group something else before I did /Martz codes / AWS events all. And if I use this logs insights query, what it's going to do is it's going to string concat the source along with the detail type, and then just do a count of how many of those events flowed through the system over the last day. So if I run that, we can get a kind of a sampling of what naturally happens in the AWS account. So this is for my Works dev account. We're a small company. We have like 14 people, and of those, probably 4 or 5 would be deploying things or doing stuff in the dev account. So not necessarily a lot of traffic, but we've had 153 different CloudFormation stack status changes flow through the system in the last day. And like it also includes stuff like step functions execution status changes. So like we've had step functions running. We've apparently, and I learned this setting up the logs, like this was actually a useful exercise for me. Apparently we have RDS database cluster snapshots happening in dev, which is probably not necessary for dev. So maybe I'll look at that later. But there's even stuff about like AWS certificates. I don't know, different interesting things in here. We have schema registry turned on in EventBridge. So anytime the schema registry detects a new version of a schema it will do the schema version created event. And that can be useful for like that event-driven documentation stuff I was talking about. And like it even tracks like AWS console logins. We use IAM Identity Center to do all of our auth. So if you wanted to do, say, a Slack notification anytime someone signs into the AWS console, don't know why you would want to do this, but like the event is there that you could trigger off of to do that.
We're doing security tracking via this exact same mechanism. Basically, anytime anybody creates an access key, anytime they do all kinds of things, it's
Yep.
great for.
Yeah, there's a lot of like you can come up with a lot of different like use cases for stuff like this. Like there's compliance changes, like there's compliance tracking in here, S3 tracking, like lots of stuff. But some things I'm disappointed aren't there is there isn't an event emitted like when you create a DynamoDB table, for example, or what did I try the other, or there aren't explicit events for like API gateways being created or something like that. Like it'd be nice if those type of events were there in native, but like I haven't seen any of them flowing through, and I've purposely tried to like kick something like that off.
Yeah, I end up fishing it out of CloudTrail quite a bit, and then doing the same thing. But then you're digging through CloudTrail events and EventBridge, and your pattern matching looks a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention that I will kind of cover now, namely because I forgot about it until right this second. So the schema registry exists, and it has a sampling of some events from AWS stuff, and weirdly not all of them. But in the sandbox section of EventBridge, I did remember that they do have a lot of like AWS event samples here, and I mean this seems a little more robust. So if I look at CloudFormation, yeah, like these are all the CloudFormation events, right? There's no API gateway one. Yeah, there's no API gateway event. States with like step function execution changes was one of the ones we saw on our list. And like clicking into it gives you a sample event to see kind of what the payload format looks like. And it even helps you build the rules that you want to trigger off of it. Right. So just calling that out. That's useful. This is probably the chosen way to go through these things instead of the schema registry, mainly because the schema registry isn't on by default and it doesn't have everything. So there's that. One final note on schema registry is it is very sensitive to versioning. So I don't have an example handy of that, but like this version here, maybe this is one. It will only track a maximum of 100 versions of something. And if you have an optional property in your event schema, something that doesn't always exist, like maybe there's an optional like name field or something. If in one event it's there and in the next event it's not, it'll change the version. The third event, the name is back. Guess what? New version. So these will top out at 100, and just looking at this one, looks like this one has probably hit well over that because it has a bunch of optional properties. So
Do you know what happens after 100? Does it roll off the oldest ones?
yeah, it rolls over. The oldest ones go away. Okay, so there's that. All right, so the other stack deployed. So if I were to go back to, yeah, this, I could swap out the log group. Believe in serverless should be there now. So if I run the same query, it's not gonna have as much data, but it should pick up a couple things that have flown through this through the system since we deployed it. So mostly CloudFormation stuff. Okay. So here's the world. Here's the earth. What did I want to show next? So yeah, things like I said, if you were to create, say, an API gateway or a DynamoDB table with CDK, and these are like the minimum things to do that. There are no corresponding events for that. But creating a bucket like this with event bridge enabled, anytime objects are created inside of S3, like it'll flow through. So if I deploy this CDK stack with the bucket and then drop a file in there, we can see the object created thing. Just a quick demo. Any questions while we wait for that?
Always, Matt.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna plug your own content for you. It's not really a question. You were just on somebody's podcast talking about how you use this whole paradigm, right, in your CI.
Yeah. I was on the Logic Hata podcast last month. I think right after you, week after you.
Yeah, I did name drop you and they said, oh yeah, we have them on next week. So you talk about what you do at Definitive in that episode.
I think we touched base on it a little bit. We use, so like I said, we don't use it as much as I did at my last place, mainly because we've been focusing on other things. But we do use stuff like the ephemeral stack concept, and we tie into the CloudFormation stack status changes for that. And that's kind of one of our bigger ones. We use GitHub webhooks as part of EDA. Like we'll have GitHub, the GitHub webhook hit a Lambda function URL basically and trigger stuff in our system to help deploy things. And then like full circle, we can kind of do auditing and make sure statuses went through and all that. Yeah, I mean, so we did touch base a little bit on that in the podcast. I guess is how I'm answering that.
I think I just must be misremembering some things. I really thought you created something recently that went kind of in depth to everything that you're doing. Am I
I mean,
misremembering?
maybe you're talking about the free code camp
Yeah, that's it. That's right.
course,
That you've already talked about.
deep dive on event-driven architecture. So me and Matt Morgan did that, and we went a lot more in depth, but it wasn't focused on AWS Native Service Events. It was just
Okay.
focused on event-driven architecture.
Okay.
Yeah. So here is the Believe in EDA stack, and if we like drop the file in here, some random picture that was an inside joke for coworkers, a meatball tree. If we go back to CloudWatch, which I closed that window, come back. There is a slight delay with CloudWatch, but if we give it a second, it should eventually show the S3 change. And like there, it didn't, and it's been a couple seconds. If I query this a couple more times, it should pop up.
Yeah, while this is waiting, we're gonna need proof of the meatball tree. Gotta have.
Yeah, I guess
Need
I
to
can't
see what that is.
easy with that.
There we go. With a river of marinara sauce.
Yep.
Oh, excellent.
My one of my coworkers loves meatballs, so I was like, man, if a meatball tree in your backyard, that would be the dream. And ChatGPT.
If Willy Wonka was a different person, this would be my factory, the meatball factory.
All right, there it is. So S3 object created, one event. So I mean, it took a little bit of time to go through. We can look at just real quick. I mean,
but that's so much nicer than going onto the S3 bucket and trying to configure the SMS trigger and all those other hurdles, right? I mean, that was pretty seamless, and you're dealing with it in the same way that you would any of the other events, which is great.
Yeah. And well, that's a Security Hub findings thing. Man, Security Hub is noisy. I tell you what. Like, there's a bunch of events. That's why I ignored it. I think from one of the queries.
Pushing this stuff to log groups and using your log insights filter there is really cool. I never thought of doing it that way. What I typically do instead of putting it to CloudWatch logs is I actually push it all to Slack. So basically, I have a listener set up on the event bridge that triggers a Lambda, and then it writes everything to Slack, which is easier for some of the people that don't want to actually use the AWS console for everything. But I really like this approach. This is really cool.
Yeah, logs insights is really useful. I find. And like, here's what is that? Oh, that's a tag change resource. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, if I do like AWS and a dot S3, that should probably, there we go. So like this is a S3 service event that went through, and there's the name of the file as part of it. So like, it's a good way to see the raw output of something. I use the pipe for the log, the event bridge rule to log group pipe a lot, because it's really useful for troubleshooting like what the raw events look like without invoking a Lambda or something like that. Like you can skip a Lambda invoke logging console.log kind of step. And the fact that we have this as a construct now means if we want a new one, we could do like this, say cloud. Well, we'll do S3 log. You do S3 events and then AWS dot S3, right? Or I guess that's the full thing. So really you just do AWS dot S3. And that can probably go away. So now if I deploy this, it's going to create another log group. And that log group is only going to have these S3 events in it.
One question I have about what you were just showing there, and you were saying about the limitations earlier, like creating DynamoDB tables, for example, doesn't show up. So the exclude filter you had there means that it's going to skip anything that's via CloudTrail, but I'm assuming that the DynamoDB stuff goes in CloudTrail, right? But maybe it doesn't get a separate event bridge event. Right?
Yeah. So even if we go back to the like logs insights and we look at what would that be? Dynamo maybe?
probably AWS.dynamo. But yeah, okay, if you do like them.
Well, there is no AWS.dynamo event pattern. Like there are no events that have that source. I was wondering more like these are case sensitive. Maybe just be table.
You get what I mean? Though they must go in CloudTrail, right?
Yeah,
It's
so
just
that's my question about it is so are the events that are specifically patterned, are they just sugar on top of the CloudTrail events, right? That adds a nice package to them. And is it just the other service teams haven't, like say I use the Health Lake generates a lot of events for for healthcare data. The control plane does some really great things. The data plane is not producing anything that goes into EventBridge, but all those are available in CloudTrail, right? Resource changes and all that stuff. And so I'm curious, Matt, if you've dug in, if like, what's the difference between natively supported events and like what Daryl and I are talking about with fishing things out of CloudTrail if you need to?
Yeah, I mean, so you can definitely fish things out of CloudTrail. What I was looking for, I just realized I didn't actually deploy the table, so there wouldn't be an event for it. But I did do that yesterday, and if I rewind a little bit, 2 days.
but did you have that? Did you have that exclude in there though when you did it, right? Because you excluded all the CloudTrail ones.
So I still don't want the CloudTrail one. What I'm looking for is the AWS.CloudFormation source and the resource. They have other more specific changes inside of it, like the resource level changes that are flowing through the system, and that might have a DynamoDB event.
Yeah, because there's a DynamoDB.aws Amazon AWS.com, I think, event source that is in CloudTrail. But I agree, I've never looked for DynamoDB events specifically with a different source attached to them.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, maybe I'll just deploy another table, right? It's not like that's hard.
I'll try to do it. I didn't realize that some of them were missing actually. So
Yeah, like I said, I've done it a bunch with Health Lake from a data plane standpoint, and I have to physically look for API calls to CloudTrail. The source can be Health Lake, the Health Lake that Amazon AWS.com, and then it does include the event name in the CloudTrail or whatever it passed, but it is more of a complex pattern, right, than trying to look specifically for what you're showing so far, which is much cleaner. And I've always wondered if the service teams are like pre-building these off top of CloudTrail for our benefit, but they just didn't do other ones. I feel like there's a research topic there somewhere that includes meatballs.
Yeah. So yeah, let's see. The table. I'm just looking for the logical idea of it, or I assume, we'll see what hits. So I just deployed that. Maybe we'll give it a couple seconds, come back to that so that CloudWatch can hydrate itself. And let's look at the next thing. So I was going to show something my good friend Matt Morgan came up with when we were working together, is a log comptroller. So frequently teams will deploy lambdas and then destroy lambdas, and the log groups for the lambdas end up sticking around, or they won't set the retention policy or stuff like that. So what this log comptroller does is it's a AWS step function, and it will traverse through the different log groups. All of the Lambda-based log groups, for example, have a specific naming pattern that goes along with it. That if you look AWS slash, if I can remember what it is, or how this code works, honestly. The log comptroller construct. It's kind of hard with the screen size it is. It's going to create a rule that anytime CloudFormation deploys, it's going to run a state machine, run a step function, and that step function is going to basically list all of the log groups and map through them, and then see if a lambda matching the log group name exists. And if it doesn't exist, it deletes the log group. And if it does exist, it will make sure that the retention policy is set so that it's not infinite. And then it will update it to like 2 weeks or whatever we set it at. So if I deploy this quickly, it will probably look a little bit better in the step functions console instead of what I've got. So let's do that. this will also create a step function. And a lot of these things, they only have to happen, like, you don't need to do this with every stack. You know, like you can just do like an account level devx like stack and include a lot of this functionality, and then like it's baked in for kind of all of the devs in the account kind of deal. This log controller is is very useful in that if you define an event pattern on it, so it only works on when the like you can set it with an event pattern so that it only works when stacks create failed or deletes complete, or things that would maybe orphan a log group. Like you don't have to run this every time a create complete event happens. But it could like audit all of the log groups and do cleanup for you, which ends up being super useful. If you have a CloudFormation stack that creates a Lambda, and the Lambda ends up, or the CloudFormation stack, state machine already exists. Yeah, because it does already exist, in fact. What was I saying? If a rollback happens and the Lambda was created, it tends to create the log group too, but then it doesn't clean up after itself, which is a big pain in the ass if you then deploy that same stack with maybe a fix. Then CloudFormation is going to hit the thing where the log group already exists and it blows up. So having a logs controller kind of in the background, like self-cleaning up anytime a rollback happens or anything like that, kind of avoids that whole situation. So let me change the name. That should do it. We just need to wait for that to finish rolling back. But that is enough time to look for the DynamoDB table. And if I relook up the logical ID, I don't know if it would be the physical ID or the logical ID, but let's see. And that should work. So here are the AWS CloudFormation events that I was looking for a DynamoDB table, and it's based on the resource status change. So this is a way that you could see, okay, here's the resource type. It's DynamoDB global table, and the create, the create was complete, and that refers to the table being created. So if you were to look in CloudFormation events down here, like it corresponds directly to this. Like an EventBridge event went out for this row. So instead of parsing through all the CloudTrail noisiness, like you could just look at this and you're good to go there. And you can trigger whatever else you need off of that. Or if the table gets updated, like you can trigger stuff on that. Like that would have an update complete status, probably. And you're still rolling back. Oh, so that's not what I wanted.
Matt, I just want to make sure that I clarify what you just said.
Yes.
In that events tab in CloudFormation, each one of those entries was an event that was published onto the default bus.
Yes. So here, for example, like, there's 3 rows here. And if we, I guess I closed that, didn't I? Gotta stop closing things. So we rerun the query. There are also, drum roll please, 3 AWS CloudFormation events. So they're 1-to-1 there.
That is nifty. I didn't know you could do that. Tie into those.
Just have to listen to your account, Alan.
Start listening.
Is your account talking to you?
Yeah. Thanks for tying in the title talk, the talk title. Nice work, team. So this is the already deployed log controller that I have in the account. I'll see if I didn't come up the other one, but let's see, where is the entry? I always forget. Naming things is hard. It's the other one. So this is actually 2 step functions. It could probably be consolidated down to 1. But what it does is, nope, I picked the wrong one. Cool. So what it does is it gets the log groups, it sets if they have been seen or not, and then it will execute the runner passing in the log groups. And it will read through that list, like this get log groups, SDK, what do they call those? My brain is blanking. The event bridge integrations. It will potentially have a next token as part of it. So after it executes the runner, if that next token exists, it will get more of them and keep doing that until it's seen all of the log groups. The other step function, the runner, will go through and basically determine, it'll split up the log group name and then figure out if it's a Lambda based log group. And if it is a Lambda based log group, it will infer the function name from what was in the log group name path. And if it is a Lambda log and there's no function present, then it knows it can delete the log group. Otherwise, it will check the retention to make sure it's not infinite and override it. And then it summarizes all of these stats too. So if we go back to the iterator and go to like the first time it ran yesterday, we can see that the work was completed, and at the bottom, it says it saw 341 log groups in this account. It deleted 128 because they were orphaned, and it set retention on 34 of them. So that's a handy thing. By having this in place and triggering on the CloudFormation stack rollbacks and fails and stuff like that, you basically won't hit that log group already exists error when you try to, do a log group that already exists.
I see value in this working with ephemeral sandboxes where you're constantly creating new resources for Lambda functions and then getting rid of them. If you're not naming things, then you'll have new ones every single time, and they're just left there.
Yep.
So I'm assuming there's a stack deleted, right? So you could trigger on that and then just clean up log groups after you've deleted, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so I still messed up a name here, which is probably just buried in the construct, and I'm not going to worry about fixing that right now. But if we were to look at the interface for this, you can pass in an event pattern similar to how I did the other construct. And if you do one like this, uncommented, of course. And if I make that go away, like these are all like create failed, delete complete, delete failed, rollbacks, update complete or failed. Like all of these may have lambdas that were orphaned. An imports wouldn't, and like a create complete wouldn't orphan anything because it's the first time it was created. So, but a create failed might. So if you were to trigger that log controller on these, then you would never run into the conflicting log group thing. I mean, I'm sure you could find a way, but in normal use, you wouldn't. In higher environments, since things are kind of more stable for us, like I have it set for this in dev, but in like our QA and our prod environment, I just have it run on a schedule because things are less likely to be orphaned there. There's less churn in the higher environments, so things probably aren't going to get orphaned on a cadence that I care about.
And those are environments you probably want to keep logs, even if it's a staging site or a production site. You don't want to clean up those logs.
Sure. Yeah, and you can set different default retentions by environment also with the same log controller in the event that they're not defined. So I don't know. I mean, these are just some easy examples. I think the most powerful thing to know about the whole setup is like in the Event Bridge console's sandbox, it has, I mean, it seems like it has probably all of the possible events. It's certainly a long list, and it had the ones that the schema registry were missing. So like, it's definitely worth a look. in here to see like there's synthetics runs. Like if you are doing like front end synthetic stuff, like you could trigger Slack messages off of this without having to like purposely like do it yourself. There's a lot of stuff you can piggyback on. Just like, and it's happening naturally in the background at no cost to you, apparently, or not consuming resource limits. So
There's a list down at the bottom too, right, where you actually put the filter. It probably doesn't have as much detail though, right? Like right down at the very bottom of the whole dialog.
sorry, where are we looking?
Like when you right there, like when you choose AWS service.
No,
No, that one.
it's like
Next one.
AWS services versus third-party partners.
Right, but it'll list all of the services and then it'll list all the events as well.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely handy. Good call out. Yeah, like if you want to get into what's the quantum one? Is that bracket? I don't do any quantum stuff. Ooh, SQS. Like SQS could have some good stuff. Oh, that's even just the CloudTrail one. It's not necessarily.
Not as much detail as what's up above, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Between the two of them, like maybe I should just like screen scrape the page and make a better documentation page or something. I don't know. But thus concludes my talk, unless there's other questions.
I actually have it's more of a question for everybody that's in here. Daryl, it seems like you have a lot of experience with this as well.
Yep.
Most of what we were talking about today feels like platform engineering, security, and administrative. Is that what you're using it for primarily? Those types of interactions? Like I'm trying to connect this with what can I do as an app builder? Literally is my reach here.
So in my case, one of the things we're using it for is we're using those nasty ECS containers to do some work and tracking when we have hundreds of tasks running and we're trying to figure out all the state changes and all the tasks and stuff like that. Basically, I have it set up so that there's a filter for all the ECS events, and I pipe all the ECS events to Slack channels, and then we dig through there of all of the state changes as things change. Like rather than having to go and query things from a log group, they all just get pushed to a Slack channel. And we're using all of those things to track the flow of all of the work that's being done in all the ECS tasks. I think you can do it in almost any AWS service though.
Yeah, I would add Alan for that question. Use this exact pattern to turn HealthLake into an event publisher that powers a nice size healthcare company's interop between external and internal partners. And so AWS HealthLake is one of my favorite services, but for some reason it does not support change data capture, which is bizarre. But via CloudTrail and EventBridge, one customer's current implementation now has PubSub coming off of their data sources and using that directly. Yeah.
So you've effectively made that change data capture.
Yeah. And so I ran that when I built that, I ran that by the service team and a few other people. And they're like, yeah, that's really great. That's an awesome use case. And it's like, it'd be really great if you built it into the product. But that's the supported use case right now.
Good one. Good one. I use Amplifies for all the stuff for Ready Set Cloud whenever a build is finished.
Mhm.
I run all of the automations behind the scenes that do the cross posting or actually send my newsletter out or whatever it is.
The nice thing about some of this is you don't even know what's in some of these events. So like back to the HealthLake use case, CloudTrail is recording 200s, 201s, the status code to the service. It's also supplying the ID of the entity that changed, the timestamp that it happened. So it's kind of like that slim with a little bit of detail event that then you can go fetch from the primary service, whatever you're working with. So, and there's some really interesting workflows you can do off of it.
So another thing that I really like to always try to get, what can we action out of these talks, Matt? And you said that your AWS accounts that you have already today are already doing this, right? There's nothing really that you need to turn on to make it happen.
Yep.
With the exception being schema registry, right?
You don't even need schema registry for it. I mean, Yeah, these events are just flowing by default to the default event bus. So
They all just go to dev null if nobody's listening for them, of course, but they're all flowing, eh?
yep.
So
Schema
getting
registry is
started.
useful, but also it clearly doesn't capture all of the AWS events anyways, despite them like guaranteed going out. Maybe that's something they can improve, but the sandbox also covers, I think, all of those. So
The documentation page that you showed at the very beginning, does that list like the descriptions of what these events are? They do seem meaningfully named, but I haven't seen anywhere that says this event gets triggered whenever X, Y, or Z happens.
so that's definitely hit or miss on here. So like this is the event bridge AWS services that generate events page, which has like the reliability for the delivery. And most of these don't have links going through them, right? And they link to the target services page. So like the CloudFormation page, if you go there, like it has good detail and stuff on like what the events are and how they can be used. But I'll pick one at random. Chime, maybe for example, I've never looked at this page probably in my life. I mean, it does have example events in it, so I don't know. I think that part on the AWS side is probably hit or miss, especially since most of these don't have links.
Probably up to each team to go and implement it, and most of them had more important things to do apparently, so they didn't do it.
Right.
I can tell you from experience too that the schema changes, and have seen it change and not be backwards compatible with some of the changes. So yeah, that's been interesting. So I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it probably won't change, but any of these, my experience has at least been like with any consumer, be extremely defensive. But also don't be surprised if the implementation adjusts.
How did you find that out? The events just weren't getting delivered?
No, the actual the elements inside of it. So when so back to that original HealthLink example, I was working on it. I started with it, and I ended up down one implementation pattern because the ID field was marked as PHI and they weren't going to publish it in CloudTrail. And when I talked to the service team about it, they were like, "Oh, why don't you just use the ID field?" I'm like, "I would, but you gray it out and mask it." And they're like, "Oh yeah, that's right." And then like one day it magically showed up. Like, "Oh, we just started publishing it." And then I've also seen like fields like disappear, and I saw production things happening where I'm like, "Oh gosh, that element just completely went away."
So then the moral of this story is put a dead letter queue on these rules for failed processing.
All of my DLQs that are dealing with app stuff in EventBridge have got DLQs on handling with them, just because again, I don't always trust consumer code either. Never trust code.
Good words.
Especially my own.
Not touching that one. We're just gonna let
okay.
that one simmer.
I don't know,
Okay,
was it
thank you.
This
not
is
or not?
this is really cool, Matt. Really, really well done. Nice job on poking through this stuff. I double vote for a CDK. I'd like to see some SAM examples just to cover the gaps. But yeah, definitely. I find that the EventBridge, the pattern matching stuff is so much more fluent and easier to build. But that's just me personally. I liked that you showed the prefix and anything but and some of the different pattern matching capabilities, because those are things that aren't they're not super well advertised. But like once you discover them, it's like, oh wow, why did I write like these 97 rules without those tips? And then you're like, rule 98 is gonna be amazing.
Yeah, I actually didn't know about that match helper until my coworker stumbled on it and like showed me. I was like, oh, okay, thanks. Not using that now.
No more writing my own.
Any other questions for Matt? Anybody? Okay. Well,
Great.
thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks
buddy.
for
Really cool.
thanks for the community and all that,
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much. Very useful.
Yep.
Thanks a
All
lot.
right. Yeah.
Be safe, everybody traveling. See you soon, Alan.
See ya.
Thank you. Yes. All right.